Playwright A.R. Gurney is best known for satirical comedies about the newest cultural minority, the WASP. He is a prolific writer, turning out a new play or screenplay for almost every year of his 30-year career, including The Dining Room, The Cocktail Hour, and Love Letters, which is seen everywhere. And now his most recent play, Later Years, is open to outstanding critical reviews. It began its life last spring at Playwrights Horizon, and it is now playing to packed houses in the West Side Theater off Broadway, and we're pleased to have Pete Gurney here. Welcome. Great
Thank you very much.
I must say, and we're a little short on time, and we'll do this again since you're here. Tell me about later life and how you see Austin and the dilemma that he faces in this relationship.
Well, it's always hard for a writer, I think, to kind of summarize his own work.
I know, but I just for the benefit of the audience, because
well, it's a play about a man who has an opportunity late in his life, and I say late in his life when he's in his 50s, say, to make a decision which he didn't make the last time around.
30 years ago,
30 years ago, he met a woman.
Right, and now he comes
and
back
he
and
didn't
sees
make
her
his
again.
move.
Right, and he's divorced and she's separated.
That's exactly.
So they're
right.
uninhibited in terms of what they can do.
That's right.
So what's at stake here?
So at stake, as far as he's concerned, is his whole later life. You have I hope the audience that has the feeling if he chooses this woman, if he can make his move, he'll live happily ever after. But he can't.
Why not?
For various reasons, which I hope.
No, I know, but I want to get into the playwright. What this is for me a window on you and the kinds of issues you like, which are relationships and behavior and how we,
Yeah, well, I think
you write plays because you want to explore ideas.
I do indeed.
And develop characters.
Right. And now in this particular case, I mean, I wanted to explore a man who was kind of culturally bereft, a man who had so much civilization. He's a Bostonian from the North Shore. Had so much civilization kind of imposed upon him, so much Boston, Puritan, traditional civilization, that he's in a kind of cultural straitjacket. He's unable to open up. I have many other people in the play who have made other kinds of decisions, who have changed their lives in various ways, including the woman he meets. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of contrast. I wanted to write a play about what civilization is, what its advantages. It gives you charm. It gives you education. It gives you a sense of being at ease, but also its inhibiting qualities. Yeah. And I wanted to show how this sort of paid off or didn't pay off in later life.
And you also wanted to deal with, and you said that you wanted to. This is me telling you what the hell you want to deal with, which is a little silly, but this is my understanding. Yeah. Okay. Because it's interesting to me. Yeah. You also want to deal with is can you change?
Can you change? Can you change? Exactly.
And can you get a second chance?
And now my hero, or my protagonist at least, Austin, says, we are who we are, only more so when we grow older. I mean, and everybody else in the play says something else.
And she believes what?
And the woman believes, and she's a complicated character because on one hand, she's almost changed too much. She's constantly changing her life, constantly making new decisions. And you can say there's a kind of rigidity, a pattern in the very fact that she changes all the time. I mean, Dante puts on the outer circles of hell those people who can never make up their mind. And she's in a kind of hell too.
Yeah. Ask a couple of questions just for the benefit of this audience that always come up with you. What is it about the world of waspdom that is so fascinating to you, and why do you choose to write primarily about that?
Well, I think the simplest answer to that is it's the world I came from, and I think most of us tend to be most at home writing about what we know. But I think in addition to that, I think in the early 80s,
group in America.
Yeah, and I think in the early 80s, or maybe a little earlier, I discovered that this group that I came from was simply another tribe. Yeah. It wasn't the kind of base by which America defined itself.
Which is sort of the way we thought of it some time
ago.
Absolutely.
And certainly the way I thought of it. I thought we were Americans and everybody else was trying to be like us.
Yeah,
and some way
in
that
the broad Judeo-Christian tradition.
Right. So that all I'm doing is what every other playwright in America seems to be doing now, namely trying to write about our cultural identity, our tribal identity, and trying to somehow reconcile that sense with our identity as Americans or as human beings.
And so what distinguishes your tribe?
Well, I mean, that's a very tricky question. I mean, I suppose when you say WASP, you really mean upper middle class Americans, primarily east of the Mississippi,
right,
and possibly north of the Mason-Dixon line, because I think southern WASPs have a very different culture.
Yeah.
So that while the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant is what the acronym comes from, it's a more complicated
right,
group than that.
Okay, let me talk about character. Civility, a certain civility.
Absolutely.
A certain demeanor of not being troubled on the surface and,
right,
and keeping things less expressions
right,
of passion. And
we're passionate people, but we don't like to let the world know we are.
And a showing of emotion. You know.
Certainly within the family only.
Yeah. I mean, George Bush, in many ways, was sort of the archetypical
very much so.
WASP,
Very much so.
You know,
very
and
much
he was always
so.
embarrassed that he showed emotion, even because sometimes he.
I think you're absolutely right. George Bush, and there's a difference between George Bush, who is Eastern, even though he spent part of his life in Texas.
His father was a senator from Connecticut.
That's right. So I think George Bush would be a good example. And this kind of character has been written about in American literature and in American drama for a long time.
But so would Franklin Roosevelt, wouldn't he?
Yes, but he's he's different in some ways because he went through personal suffering. You know, he had his polio. He was an aristocrat, maybe a little above the average American WASPs. He was a Roosevelt. He came from the old Dutch tradition, where the WASPs I write about tend to come from the English tradition and probably are less classy.
Yeah. Where do you come down on this idea of change, and that in fact one can change and one can? Are you in sync with Austen, your principal protagonist? Or are you?
I could just kind of raise the question.
You don't answer
and
them.
leave it open.
Yeah.
I mean, and in the end, I think you have to say some people are capable of doing it, and some people can't.
To something else you've written, Love Letters is played everywhere, isn't it? It's a two-character play, and every time I turn to the LA Times or the Chicago paper or the New York, there's always two other actors coming in to play it, whether
it's played everywhere, I mean, lots of places in the U.S. and in Canada and in South America, and I've seen it done in Japan and in India. The only place it was a total disaster was England, if you can believe it, and it's very interesting to me why. I mean, I think the English pride themselves on doing the epistolary thing. They think that's their tradition. They don't really like my plays very much in England because I think they like their American writers to be much more brutal and iconoclastic and deal with lower life people. And so what I do, I think they feel, and maybe they're right, is too close to what they do. And so we opened it in England, and they nailed us up and down the line.
Why do you think it works, though? I mean, because
in this country, and first place, it's a good story. It's a good sort of story of star-crossed lovers. It's the kind of Romeo and Juliet kind of plot. It covers a lot of ground. It takes place over 50 years, really, and a lot of cultural changes happened in this country, and our characters reflect that in Love Letters. Also, it's easy to do in the sense that actors don't have to rehearse it for 4 weeks. They have to rehearse it a little, but they can just sit down at a desk and read it, and so you get very good actors doing it.
You draw on your own family.
For that, a little.
No, yeah, for a lot of what you've written.
For a lot of what I've written, but not all of what I've written.
And how did they react to this?
My family, is somewhat. Its reactions are somewhat complicated. I think, maybe rightly so, they don't want to see themselves paraded on stage. I've normally tried to kind of.
You warned them.
I've warned them. That doesn't do much good.
Because they still go and read.
Or don't go. They normally not always interested in what I'm doing, and maybe they're right.
But are they ever angry?
Yes, I've had a major confrontation. My father's no longer alive, but I had a major confrontation with my father over a play I wrote called... No, that was a Cocktail Hour I wrote, and I could only write 10 years after he died. No, it was a play called Scenes from American Life, which was done at Lincoln Center in 1971. And
what was his reaction?
He felt that I had displayed for all the world to see, elements in our family, and used words on stage which had no business being used. He felt in some way I was demeaning myself, my family, and particularly him.
And did it cause a complete
we had
schism between the two?
It did for a while. I mean, my father was a forgiving man. I don't think he ever was much at home with the fact that I was a playwright, but so we just sort of avoided that discussion. Fortunately, I was not. He wasn't. He didn't send me to drama school or pay for that, so that I felt free and clear as far as any kind of economic obligation to him on that score. So that we had we agreed to disagree on that subject.
Yeah. What's next for you? Are you still on the faculty of MIT?
I am.
Yeah, you have tenure there, don't you?
I do.
But you haven't been there teaching for about 8 or 9 years.
You're right. You've done your research.
Well, what's going on here?
Well, MIT's been very good to me, and
I'd say.
I mean, they don't pay me. I mean, I'm on the faculty, and they don't pay me now. I'm on a kind of leave of absence, though I do try to keep in touch with MIT, and I go back there and I give talks occasionally, and occasionally when I have a play on, we have MIT evenings, and I give a talk then. I don't know why they haven't fired me. I certainly had to wonder.
That's why.
Well, they could.
They could jerk that back if you don't.
Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, or Moynihan too. I think Moynihan had a problem,
absolutely.
at
Harvard says 2 years of leave of absence and you're out.
Yeah.
MIT has a different policy, and you'll have to ask them why they kept me.
But you don't teach playwrights. As I understand it, you teach creative writing or English literature, don't you? Or what do you teach?
Well, actually, they didn't let me teach much creative writing there. I taught classical literature and American literature. I didn't teach much playwriting. Occasionally, I would.
What's the most influential book on you that you've read?
The most influential book I've ever read?
Yeah. I mean, does anything...
I should say the Bible.
No, don't say the Bible, but say a novel.
I think probably War and Peace or Anna Karenina, probably the most powerfully effective.
Character.
Yeah.
Do you think of yourself in the tradition of John O'Hara and people like that?
Not so much John O'Hara. John O'Hara was kind of cranky.
He was.
I certainly consider myself in the tradition of Cheever.
Yeah, John Cheever, right.
And to some degree Fitzgerald and Edith Wharton and James.
Right.
John O'Hara wanted to be in that tradition, and in some ways was, but a little outside that main line.
It's great to have you here. I hope we can do this again and talk more about some of these themes and some of the plays, and I hope it's not too painful to come to.
Not at all, not at all. Charlie, thank you.
Thank you. A.R. Pete Gurney. Later Life, it's on, where is it now?
It's at the West Side Theater on 43rd Street.
There you go. Get down there and understand something about life and relationships that's come back together 30 years after the first meeting. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you again next time.